Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders. This is the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Alex Yu. Alex is a technology account director, which is the CTO for strategic accounts, leading all the technical pre-sales engagements at Microsoft, a very well-known worldwide organization, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Now, Alex is an expert in sales and technology business development. He's had a number of decades worth of experience working at Microsoft in various different roles and functionalities, but all with a very common thread. He's very passionate about not only diversity, inclusion and belonging, but also helping to provide a vision and path for Microsoft clients to help realize value from the Microsoft Cloud products. Alex and I met through the wonders of LinkedIn, actually, and I've been very fascinated, and I would love Alex to share with you all some of his personal story. Alex actually is Filipino, so we connected over our Asian roots. He grew up in New York and is now in Dallas in the States. So great to welcome you to the show today, Alex.
Thank you, Leila. Glad to be here.
So tell me, Alex, and for all of our listeners who are tuning in to this podcast, how did you come to be where you are today? Because you've had a really fascinating cultural background and, you know, you've had lots of excellent roles within various different disciplines throughout Microsoft. Was this a planned piece or was this serendipity that led you to this moment in time?
Wow. No, that's a great question, right? So in terms of just my story, just really briefly, I was born in the Philippines in a town called Cebu, a very small island. My parents immigrated here in 1972, and I'm going to date myself a little bit. So they moved here in 72. They left my brother, and I have a brother, and actually I have a half sister and a half brother as well. My parents are divorced, but they left me in the Philippines and my brother at the time and moved to New York. So they left us there for about 5 years. So I did not move to the States till about 77. Predominantly grew up in the Hell's Kitchen part of Manhattan for about 2 years, then Woodside, Queens, and then moved to Wantagh, Long Island. And that's where I spent most of my formative years. And then I moved to Texas. And what brought me to Texas, very interesting story. One of my college friends, closest friends to this day, he's going to kill me for saying this. He was a mama's boy, right? And his parents were like, look, he's getting a job. I had nothing going on. This was the summer of 92. I was basically mowing lawns and unemployed with a physics degree and a double E minor, okay? So moved to Texas. He got relocated. You know, he flew down here, had a job, and I joined him. And basically for the first 3 months, I had no plan, running up credit card debt, working out, and basically clubbing. I'm embarrassed to say that was my life in the summer of 92.
Love it.
Yeah, okay, that's great. But I answered an ad in a paper, and Circuit City, who is no longer in business, they were opening up a store here in the Dallas area, and I got a job selling computers, telephone equipment, and pretty much every small electronics equipment there. Anyway, so it is serendipity that I got into Microsoft. The shopping season, Christmas season of 92, a lady came in. She was an executive admin for some executives here in Irving, Texas. I did not even know Microsoft existed in Dallas. And at that time, they weren't as well known, maybe in the Pacific Northwest, but not as well known necessarily in the middle South states. She came in, she's like, hey, look, we're chatting it up. I think I had a decent personality. We talked, and she's like, look, we're hiring for some tech support engineers in Irving. Why don't you apply? So I faxed in my resume 5 times, and then finally they called me up, and they were on a hiring frenzy. But anyway, I guess I did well in the interview, and I got hired to be a Windows 3.1 and MS-DOS 6.2 tech support engineer at Microsoft here in Texas. And basically the rest is history, as they say. So that's how I got into Microsoft. Yeah.
That is brilliant. And I love it. I remember MS-DOS. Oh, that is so cool. And and I love that you faxed in your resume as
Yeah,
well, or
that's
CV as
right.
we call it here in the UK. That is just brilliant. Faxed it and 5 times in case they didn't see it that first time.
Exactly,
But it is that
exactly.
persistence, isn't it? And I know you modestly say it's kind of right place, right time, but persistence is absolutely key. I think many successful leaders that I speak to, actually persistence and resilience and being able to keep on pushing on when you don't know what is ahead, I think is absolutely
Absolutely.
crucial to success. And clearly it's landed you in good form, because you are where you are today as CTO, with one of the best known organizations in the world.
Yeah, no, it was definitely, as you said, the right place at the right time. And I always tell people I looked into getting at Microsoft, but I did not get lucky staying here for 27 years. It is definitely a very fast-paced environment, and just seeing the changes from that time, right? February of '93 to today, we're talking a gamut of, you know, I say hits and misses, and right now Microsoft is really getting its groove back, right? So I had a chance to not obviously move to Seattle during that time, and I really wanted to get an understanding of the corporate landscape. It was just really good opportunity. So I did have a chance to live in Seattle for 5 years, from '96 to 2001. And then, another personal note, I did meet my wife at Microsoft. We got married actually in Seattle at the Columbia Tower Club. I want to put a plug in for that. It was a fantastic wedding. And really a lot of folks that came to my wedding from both my college days in New York, and then folks obviously local to Seattle, and even family in Texas. It was just a great place to be, because not a lot of people visit the Pacific Northwest. It's pretty funny, right? And you thinking about weather, the UK has a very similar weather to the Pacific Northwest. It's pretty dreary, right, during the winter. So not a lot of people think about going to that area. So it was great. So a lot of people made it a vacation. Anyway, and then I found myself back in Dallas, because that's where my wife's family is from. So we settled here in the Dallas area, and now I live in Allen, Texas, a suburb about 25 miles north of Dallas. So yeah. This kind of rounds out my personal sort of journey. But the whole time my kids were born, been in Microsoft, like literally half my life, right? More than half my life, I've been in this company, and it's just been a blessing, to be honest with you.
How wonderful and great, as you've described there, to be seeing, especially within technology, what's happened from then to what's happened now in under 3 decades. Oh my goodness, what a roller coaster. Clearly you have, like you said, spent half your life there. It's, what a great place to kind of grow up in the corporate sense, absolutely phenomenal. And, I guess in terms of, obviously subjects for today and diversity and inclusion,
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness, when we spoke last, I was like, oh, God damn it, we should be recording this right now, because it's like a podcast in and to itself. And
Yeah.
see, I'm picking up some of these American phrases, because as you know, I have an American husband, and he says, God damn it, all the time. Yeah, and I love it. And he's like, oh, please don't do the American accent. You can't do it very well. So I was like, okay. But anyway, I know how important diversity and inclusion, but also within those facets of diversity and inclusion sits many different things, both visible diversities and invisible diversities. And actually religion and belief systems. I know that is something that is really key to you and your life, and something which we're going to kind of chat about and explore in today's podcast. And one thing that I would be very fascinated to hear about is not only how you would identify in terms of religious beliefs and culture, but also how that may impact you in the workplace, because ultimately there's many different parts of ourselves, and we hear a lot these days about bringing your full self to work. And this is not only our full self on the surface, but scratching below that, without asking these questions, or I think you said in your LinkedIn profile, asking sometimes the dumb question, which I totally loved. It is, what is it that exists below skin level? And let's dig deeper into getting to know one another, and not just what is on the surface and what our perceptions are, but what people's spiritual, religious beliefs and their culture is like, because that is just as important as everything else that makes up the holistic piece for diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'll start this conversation. I'll try to be as succinct as I can, right? Being being born in the Philippines, the Asian or Filipinos are predominantly Catholic. All right. So when I moved to the States, I was definitely what we call a non-practicing Catholic. Okay. And really my first job in moving here as you know, I was 7 when I moved here, was really getting assimilated. Right. So to be honest with you, religion at that time was really on the back burner. And as I grew up, I was like, look, I have to learn English, and I can't have an accent. Right. I've got to really be part of this culture, whatever that was at the time. Right. So I would say that I've always believed in God. Right. I've always believed in Jesus Christ, right, as the person that was brought down here as the Messiah and really, you know, died on the cross for our sins. But I was never active. When I say active, you know, reading the Bible, really truly understanding what the Word of God was saying to me. Right. So I was non-practicing, and then when I moved to Long Island, then I get infused with the Jewish community, right? And then I'm like, wait, there's other religions besides Catholicism? Really? There's Protestant? What the heck is that, right? So just going through that journey. Now, at this time, I was a teenager. But it wasn't until, to be honest with you, till my son was born that I really, and mind you, I'll tell this funny story. My wife grew up Southern Baptist, okay? And people can, if you're not exposed to Southern Baptist, it's definitely an interesting sect of Christianity, right? But in the South. So she grew up Southern Baptist, and luckily for me, her parents allowed, at that time, they knew that I was Christian, and I'll put this in quotes, but I wasn't really practicing, right? So anyway, until my son was born and we did attend a Baptist church, that's when I really started thinking, okay, this has to be a major part of my life, right? And when I think about religion in all forms or facets, it's really a journey. And right, for me, it's really wanting to be more like Jesus Christ, right? And so that was one inflection point. And then just recently, I actually joined a ministry at a church we have here, Cottonwood Creek Baptist Church. It's called the Iron Man of God. It's kind of funny. I hope people have heard Iron Man of God. Wow, that sounds interesting, right? But the main tenet of that ministry is really providing the basis of Christianity, and as a man, right? And I know some feminists out there, whatever. I'm sorry, I'm going to start riffing, Leila, and I apologize for this. It's like, okay, the man being the leader of the household, right? And not like, hey, not that my wife and I aren't equal, but to be honest with you, it does make a difference, right? And you know, I have lots of opinions around this, but bottom line is, you know, really studying the Word, you know, studying the different areas of the Bible, sort of understanding and having that be a part of my daily ritual, right? Having quiet time and listening and reading and understanding. And quite frankly, now today, you know, how that's transformed me is if there's something that I know that, you know, what I call not morally wrong, but just, am I going to sin today? Am I going to do something really awkward or weird, right? I have scriptures that I can kind of fall back to, as opposed to, is this my own power? Like, oh no, I can handle it because I'm Alex Uwe. I can do this, right? Because it's me and I'm successful, whatever. But stepping back and really looking at scripture to sort of guide my behavior. So anyway, that's sort of the story around how that's important to me personally. And then, you know, if you want me to go off in terms of like talking about it through work, right?
I would love to learn about the impact in work, but thank you also thank you very much for sharing and for being so incredibly open and honest about it. One thing I was really curious to ask when you were telling that story, was there you know, clearly there was a point in your life, you know, especially with the children, that you maybe became more interested within religion and finding out more about your roots. And like yourself, you know, I'd class myself as Christian. I went to a Church of England school. I have been baptized, and you know, everything like this. And then my mum is Catholic, and my husband, you know, is Greek Orthodox. You know, so it's. But I think there is a point. You know, again, I'm not necessarily, everyone will agree with me here, that there is a point where a lot of the religions cross over, because it is ultimately, you know, about a guiding way within life that shows us how we can constantly be better, and religious or not religious, you know, it's about humanity, right? But was there anything that, because I've spoken to a number of people in the past who say, do you know, there was something that happened in my life, whether it was a tragic moment or even sometimes trauma, that has then sent them in the direction of religion. Was there anything other than obviously the birth of your children? and being exposed to other beliefs and other systems, of kind of belief system like Judaism, as you've mentioned there in Long Island, was there anything that kind of really sparked that, that burning desire to become more embodied into religion?
Yeah, I would love to say there's this glamorous story around that, but to be honest with you, it's really about leading the family. I mean, that's the bottom line, right? And the inflection point of, again, when my son was born, my daughter was born, just it's one of those things where I've always grown up being, having in my mind, look, if you can't, you have to rely on yourself, right? Growing up in the 80s, both my parents worked. I was a latchkey kid. It was, left alone a lot. Okay. Thankfully, I always say this, I mean, I'm glad I didn't get into too much trouble, but at the end of the day, it's really about the family and just making myself better. I feel like that's a way for me to be held accountable. That's really the right way to say it, I think. Being held accountable to a higher power, and then part of that, whoever's listening, whatever their beliefs are, like, that's, to me, there's a book. Okay, I want to put this plug in here. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Okay, I read that about 3 or 4 years ago, and believe it or not, my wife's brother gave that book to me 12 years ago. I wasn't ready to read it. Okay, and this was already after my kids were born. Okay, and so I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I'll tell you what, if you got, it's a long book, but it is definitely worth a read if there's sort of any questions about really mixing science and faith and this whole concept of does God exist, right? Just a great book. But anyway, no, just really, it's family. And look, I want to be open, and I'm going to apologize to my wife ahead of time. Hey, we get into some pretty decent arguments. I'll leave it at that, especially related to kids and just how we're running the family. And to be honest with you, this is an area where it's like she holds me accountable to say, look, if you're leading our household, you say Jesus is first, God is first. If your behavior aligns to that, then you shouldn't be acting as selfish as you are, right? You should be paying more attention, right? So anyway, that's really the big driver for that for me.
I really like how you've put that there, because I think we are often our own worst enemy, really, in terms of being critical of ourselves. And I mean, it can certainly, if you're anything like myself, I'll often beat myself up about things and think, oh God, I could have done that better. I could have said that better, and, everything like that. But I'm convinced that many other people also think that. And so the way that you put it there in terms of being accountable to what is ultimately a bigger power that is much more, big than us, our families, absolutely everything overriding that is a very kind of philosophical way to put it. And it's made me think, actually. Very interesting indeed. And how does this play out, say, within the workplace? Because I think this is one piece which is also very interesting. And I do think, organizations that are, absolutely kind of embracing diversity and inclusion and different cultural beliefs. Often I have now seen prayer rooms within organizations and certain places where people can pay their worship and respects. How does this play out within the work life? Because obviously, if you are going to be a better person holistically, and it is about, being your whole self, surely should there be a place for this in the workplace? Question mark.
I am going to present an opinion that has nothing to do with Microsoft. Okay, so I'm gonna state it that in case somebody's listening, that's an executive that can fire me. Anyway, so I'll say it like this. I feel there's this term, and you probably have heard of this, Leila. It's called covering. A friend of mine calls it code switching. And there's two topics that they say, and I'm going to assume this is just in America. You don't talk about religion or politics at work. You just don't, right? So how do I bring my authentic self, right? So I've got a couple of stories I'm going to share. I had a chance to visit Bangalore, 2008, okay? And I had been working with some folks in videoing on conference calls wasn't as big back then, right? But there's names that I knew they were Indian, right? From Bangalore, but they had names that were very, very much American, quote unquote, again, right? So I meet them. And for some reason, when I leave the States and I go to a country like India or quite frankly, any other country, I can talk about religion and nobody gets uptight about it, right? And I will tell them, and I'll use a generic name. I don't know. Xavier was one person that I met, right? And I'm like, dude, is that flat out, was that the name you were born with? Right. And so I learned that in India, right, again, I was only there for a week, just talking to my peers, the names, they change their names. People there change their names based on their religion. Right. So it's very clear. So a Muslim, if you're in Islam, right, they change their names. If you're Christian, right, not all of them do it. I'm just saying in general, like, so they are pretty much bringing their authentic self to the office every single day, because if someone's name is, anyway, is such and such, they practice Islam or Hinduism or they're Christian or whatever else, right? Now, the reason I tell you that story is I think obviously in the States, whatever God-given name or whatever name you were given at birth, right, most likely you're not changing it, right, for your religion. So everyone assumes in the Western culture, like you're some sort of Christian, possibly Jewish or whatever the case may be. But you can maybe sometimes identify, maybe sometimes you can't. So bottom line is, like, I'm automatically what I call covering. Okay, I'm covering at work because number one, it's taboo to talk about religion because I may offend somebody. Okay, now more recently in the Microsoft space, at least in Texas, there were some folks that I'm friends with. They're Muslim, right? They actually created a prayer room. So this is an interesting story. It's it's not a prayer room. It's a quiet room. Okay, and it's meant to be for everybody. Well, one of the guys that actually started that in our office here, I said, so is this for Muslims only, or can anyone use this room? And then he said, he flat out corrected me and said, look, technically it's a quiet room, Alex, right? It's not necessarily a prayer room. It's not just for people that need to pray, right? And I think the Islam religion that have to pray on Fridays or whatever the case may be. But so I'm just having those types of conversations isn't the norm, right? Like, and I don't know, because I'm Asian or whatever, that it gives me, like, I'm just comfortable. So I'm okay talking about religion and politics at work, but I always like to preface, hey, look, I still want to be friends after we have this conversation, right? And I even posted on Facebook, I'm like, guys, just because we're friends on Facebook, let's not assume that I'm going to vote for a certain person, or we have this, or we even eat the same way, right? So anyway, so in terms of work, it is still, to me, that there's a major covering going on. I mean, there's major covering when it comes to religion in the workplace, right? It's not something that can come up. Like, for instance, perfect example, someone's going through a tough time, okay? And you say, I'm going to send you positive thoughts. Now, I'm going to flat out tell you, hey, I'm going to pray for you. I'm just flat out going to pray for you, okay? And then, if they're Christian, they know I'm Christian, cool. But if they don't, I'm just going to tell them. I'm not going to say, I'm going to send you positive. I don't even know what that means. Like, so, and again, people may not agree with me, but I'm going to pray for you. Like, if someone's going with you, Leila, can I pray for you? Can I pray for your family? Okay? And knowing that that's where it's coming from is, again, seated and looking towards Jesus and God. So anyway, I'll stop there. That's sort of my feeling there.
I mean, first of all, I concur with you, and I think sometimes religion and beliefs are one of the facets of diversity and inclusion that does actually get forgotten about. And maybe not forgotten about would be necessarily the right way to put it, but as you said very articulately, it is still a taboo subject. And I obviously talked to you about our white paper, in which we are addressing, what I would call a often invisible diversity. Sometimes there are visible characteristics that might allude to someone being, of a certain religion, but ultimately it is an invisible diversity as I see it, unless there is something external that tells you that that person, worships a certain God or is, of a particular religion. But it's a huge, huge, huge part of our lives. And, I think, what I love, about speaking with you, if you don't mind me saying, is that you are just so honest. And the great thing about being, as you've said, comfortable to be able to kind of ask these questions is is excellent, and something that I think people need to do more of, because right now we're having this conversation. I don't know, I'm not even saying that there would be a right or wrong answer to anything around this, but by asking your Muslim friend, what about this room, can anyone come in here, straight away you break down that barrier. Because I wouldn't have known either. I would have been, I could have quite imagined myself asking that question. Oh, excuse me, do you mind? And maybe it is that because we look Asian, you kind of, get away with being able to ask these, so-called dumb questions in inverted commas. But if you don't ask, you don't know. And I think, look, at the end of the day, the question is not coming from a place of negativity. It's coming from a place of pure curiosity and to find out more. And, I spoke to some great business leaders who had been done Eid and actually even fasted with some of their friends. And I thought, how wonderful is that? Is they are educating themselves by looking through the lens and experiencing culture through the eyes of another. Doesn't mean that they're going to convert to another religion or anything like that. But I think, isn't there a richness, surely, in learning more, experiencing other viewpoints, and ultimately giving that richness and diversity of thought, and eclectic opinion, because we all look through the world in a very, very different lens. And so, education is absolutely key. And I would love for for this podcast to be a driver for others to be able to, I know we keep saying the dumb question, but I don't think they are dumb questions, but to be able to ask those questions, because it is by talking that we get this stuff out on the table and we get comfortable with it. But I think, partially, and I don't know whether you agree or disagree with this, but I think, especially when it comes to religion, or, like you say, religion and politics, and people kind of not wanting to talk that or avoid that because it can cause, the odd family rift. We've even, I'm sure it's okay me saying this, we've even had this, disagreements on kind of politics and whatever, but it is, it doesn't mean that you aren't going to be friends at the end of it just because you have a difference of viewpoint. But I do worry that there is such a fear, especially given the world that we live in, and obviously that, a lot of the often terrible things we hear in the news, that, people start to be worried about being vilified for what they say. And in essence, as you say, and I speak about this in my book actually as well, is covering part of ourselves in order to fit in, to make it easier for ourselves, because we're worried about speaking up. And ultimately, that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing not being able to express our viewpoint, to be able to have conversation. We are, as human beings, intrinsically want to be able to share and be effusive about things that we are interested in.
Absolutely. Yeah, the whole concept, you had said this around, and this is a big deal at Microsoft, right? This is, everyone's talking about, how do we bring your authentic self to work, right? And like, what really does that mean, right? And I think part of it is, my understanding, just from my experience at Microsoft, is that I think that we're wanting to, we need to move ahead and really be, show leadership in a way that makes, in terms of the enterprise, as Microsoft, the corporation, retain great employees, right? Have an environment where people feel safe. That's the, and to be honest with you, the way things are going in this world, I've never, I don't know if you felt this way, but it's so critical, and this is a big inflection point for how I grew up. I wanted to fit in, right? I hate to use this line. As soon as I got off the boat, which is really the airplane, okay, I wanted to fit in, right? And to be honest with you, I'd never seen an African American person until I came to the States. Like, that was like I was in a very vanilla culture in the Philippines, right, growing up there, right? But and then Puerto Ricans, whatever, like Hispanic, the whole gamut, in Manhattan, in Hell's Kitchen. I'm gonna see it all, but I wanted to fit in. That was my brother and I. That's something that stuck. I could speak from, I think, that stuck in our minds. How do we fit in, right? So my whole life, when I think about diversity and inclusion, okay, if I talk to my African American friends, now I can tell this, right? And I did not grow up African American. I'm not Black, but just even talking to some friends that I have at church that are African, or when I talk to my Muslim friends, or when I talk to my Chinese friends, or when I talk to my Jewish friends or white friends, whatever, I really force myself to talk with them in a way that we are authentic with each other, right? And whether that be talking about where we grew up or some of the things that we have in common, but I'm aware, right, that they are who they are because of some of those things. I try to force myself to, and look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, there's times that I judge people. There's time. I mean, I think we all fall into that, right? And that's why I always go back. That's why I'm going back to religion again, and that's why I'm going back to what I'm trying to follow. Is like, hey, you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. What the hell does that mean? That means that I should embrace you as a fellow brother and sister, right, of the human race, and just at least get to know you. Be curious, you know. And that's one of the things I saw somewhere. Just ask the question. I am curious about this, right? It's a non-threatening way to really figure out how to dig under the covers. But anyway, sorry. Hope that made some sense. But
No, it makes absolute sense. And, you know, and we mentioned last time we spoke, and I absolutely, I empathise with your desire and need to fit in when you're younger. And I shared this with you, perhaps I will share it again now. When we came from Hong Kong, off the plane, the boat, whatever we want to call it. You know, I was adopted by two amazing parents, you know, white British in Hong Kong when Hong Kong was a British colony. And we were in an international school then, so we were mixing with all different colours and races and different types of kids. And we moved to Yorkshire, which is north in the UK, and it was very kind of middle class white school. And, you know, similar to yourself, you know, my brother and I were the only Chinese kids in the school. And, you know, I remember finding it terribly difficult. You know, not because I'd seen lots of white kids and everything like that, because I grew up in an international school in Hong Kong, but, you know, at the age of 6, then suddenly being the only Chinese child along with my brother in the school, all I wanted was to fit in. I mean, I wanted to have blonde hair and blue eyes. That is what I wanted. That is what I wished for. I long for it. And, you know, look back now and I kind of just think, wow, you know, you really, I think, especially when you're young, you know, there is that intrinsic need to belong to something and to, you know, to feel that you are part of something. And I think, you know, in particular, unless perhaps you are a very, you know, very, very confident child, you want to do what's cool and you want to be the same as everyone else. It's really not until you find the, you know, as you put it earlier, you know, really very comfortable in your own skin. And that comes with Asian experiences and lived experiences, that, you know, you realize that actually being different is a hugely powerful piece. But, you know, it makes me wonder, and again, I could be right or wrong here, I don't know. You know, I certainly, you know, went to a Church of England school. I was in the church choir, and I loved it actually. But no, I think, you know, the piece of religion there that kind of overrides almost, you know, many different things. If we are, you know, in our different groups, and we all have our different biases. And look, you know, I have my biases. Everyone has their biases. I think anyone that says they don't have biases doesn't mean they're not inclusive, but we all have biases. It's just a natural thing. It's learning to recognize those biases and those unconscious biases that we can become better people. You know, but I wonder whether, you know, religion, this kind of, you know, the invisible being that is much bigger than us, allows us to actually have that sense of comfort and that sense of belonging. Because actually, no matter what different environment you are in and the different people that you're in, whether you are still in the phase of trying to fit in, and, you know, occasionally I still have it. You know, I sometimes get imposter syndrome walking to a board and think, oh my God, what am I doing here? Am I going to say something stupid? I better kind of straighten my back and try and act intelligent. You know, but actually that bigger, more holistic piece there of kind of, you know, of God and of something that is, you know, about kind of the greater good, you know, it does give that, you know, it's that inner piece, and it's that inner sense almost of belonging. So actually, you know, I think the you know, the two are almost kind of quite intrinsically linked, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think you're right on. It's, I don't know. This is as the terms are getting more cliche. These are interesting times, right? With just even with COVID, right? And the situation with the African American community, and you know, I hate to even say systemic racism in America, and some of the things that we're going through. It's even more imperative that we find some common ground. I think, you know, if I can make this piece and this platform is like, let's just continue to understand each other. Like, and I can't put myself in my African American brothers or sisters' shoes, right? I didn't grow up that way, right? I mean, but I feel like we've got to get to that point of just, again, I said that love conquers all, and it's so true. But trusting each other, trying to really be more curious, and just embracing. I think that could really help along the way. And then I just, in America, and I don't know like this in the UK, everything's got to get political. I'm not going to talk about politics on this podcast, but everything all of a sudden gets political, and then all of a sudden these emotions come out, right? And it's like, guys, does it have to be this way? And I'm sad. I'm definitely saddened by some of the things that have been going on. But I think there's a major. Actually, my CEO just sent out a blog and sent a note to the entire company yesterday, and I put on my LinkedIn. When you get a chance, check it out. At least we're taking a stand as a company. We are taking a stand, right? And I think we're working on making sure that, and from my point of view, regardless of how we think about D&I and some of the ways we cover, providing opportunities and really just being aware that this stuff is going on, right? And I'm a firm believer there is definitive things in our environment that's causing us not to be authentic, not to be honest with each other, right? And one of my friends, code switching from talking to a group of folks within my a certain community, or within work, outside of work, whatever the case may be. And I mean, even church, like I got church friends. I hate to say that. Like I got church friends. I talk to my church friends in a certain way. I don't talk about politics, talk about religion, but I got church friends, and I've got my, friends I play racquetball with, or whatever the case may be. Like I even segment it. And I think that, to me, I think that's natural, but it doesn't have to be. I don't know. So, yeah.
I am going to use your terminology again in the future. I love that code switching. That but it's so true. It is so true. And it is a hard thing. I know we talk a lot about, authentic selves and being other authentic selves, but it is hard. It is really hard. It's actually a complex, multifaceted issue, because we all have, and I think that's totally natural, having friends to talk about certain things with. I think it's the way, but I wish it wasn't so much like that. I think when it's back to its simplest forms, and to re-quote yourself, that finding this common ground is absolutely key. Talking is the route to understanding, and certainly I share your deep sadness to what is going on in the world. And I mean, it'd be easy to kind of sit back and not say anything, but I heard a quote the other day that made me really think. I think silence is violence, and so we must keep speaking out. What in a world that we live in is social media, where people can take to Twitter and rant. Oh my goodness, I've seen some rants on Twitter and social media, but the better thing to do is to keep as much positive, truthful, honest voice out there as we can, because, as you mentioned, everything with Black Lives Matter at the moment is absolutely devastating. It's very, very difficult, I think, to find those words, especially when you aren't Black. None of us, as you said before, none of us can understand. We can do our absolute best to empathize and to support and guide, and everything like that, and be fantastic allies. It is criminal not to, but we physically cannot understand what it is like to be an African American, or to be African living in the UK, which and whatever. It is systemic. It is it's decades and decades and decades worth of history there that we must recognize, and we must recognize it by talking about it, but ultimately using that and platforms to be able to spearhead that into action. And I did actually see the piece that you shared on your CEO, and I think if I may just touch upon that, I think the best organizations are willing to put a line in the sand. It's been saddening to see CEOs and leaders that I thought would have taken a stand that haven't. And in one sense, I want to say I can understand, but I don't. Is why would you not, in a position of great influence, in a position that, yes, I'm sure you've worked for it very, very, very hard indeed, and people who we look up to and have a lot of respect for, and our future generations of leaders look up to these senior folks, why would you not speak out about this? It doesn't mean that you need to say the most perfect statement. Right. Because what can you say right now that is perfect, or that is going to make it better? I think we're clear that words aren't going to make it better, but at least, you know, speaking out about it in order to then turn this into action is the best outcome. Better outcome, sorry, I should say, better outcome than saying nothing at all.
Right, right, exactly. That's it. I mean, we've got to talk. We've got to talk about it. And Leila, before I forget, I do want to give credit where credit's due. Code switching is from a friend of mine. His name is Elliot. He's actually got a public link to some of the stuff that he's wanting to talk about. That Elliot Dunlap is. I'm not going to take that word. I use it now. As soon as I heard him say it, I use it all the time. It's just, yeah. Anyway, sorry. I want to make sure I give credit.
Credit where credit's due. Thank you, Elliot, for imparting on Alex and me the code switching.
Exactly.
So before we go, and I'm conscious, Alex, that you and I could sit here and chew the fat, as we call it in the UK, for hours, if not longer.
Yeah.
But I'm conscious of timing, that you have got a very important job. But before we go, I'd love to go into a little lightning round, if that's okay. And first and foremost, in fact, I'll give you about a minute to answer each question, unless you want to do a short fire answer. Well, sometimes people spill over, and then I don't want to interrupt, because actually some of this stuff is gold dust, and look, if it can inspire and educate and motivate one person on the planet, it's been worth doing it. It's been worth it. So first and foremost, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you personally, Alex?
Yeah, so I use Stephen Covey was one of the authors that I really sort of love reading, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but seek to understand, right? And then be understood. And part of that too is being self-aware. And I think that's what, and I'm reading this other book by Bruce Deal. It's called Trust First, right? It's recent, but just putting it all together, being curious, right? I mean, to me, it's not even about how I need to act or do, we want to be curious, understand before trying to impart my opinion of you, right? And of course, we always judging, I guess, is a bad thing to do. We have to be aware of how we are communicating. And I think that's ultra important. And I think that if I can build that rapport, like the best relationships that I've had, obviously, thankfully, I think I still have this relationship with my wife and my closest friends, is we can be honest and we can talk about stuff, right? And because it's coming from a good place, right? So yeah, that's what I would say is trust, understand, and then really engage in dialogue. That's the foundation for D&I for me.
Great answer. And I love that you're so open about having what I think are, I'm breaking my own rules, you see now, and talking over 1 minute, but I think it's really healthy to have challenge and debate. My husband and I share something personal. He'll say, well, we definitely do debate, but it's great because life would be boring if not. And like you say, we want to understand, and we all have different perspectives. We might not agree with them all, but why not get it out on the table? Because it is interesting to learn more. And I also wonder as well, this could be personal, it could be professional. Who have been the biggest inspirations throughout your life?
I think this is going to sound, I might get emotional and this is really going to be bad. So I'm going to try not to. So let me give me a second here, because I don't want this to sound bad for my family, right? My formidable years, I would say that a lot of my closest friends' parents, right? Both my parents worked a lot. And my parents also were divorced, I think, by the time I was 16. So my mom had to raise my brother and I by herself, and she did her best. But we were left alone a lot. And so we had to really lean on our friends, right? My closest friends, even like during the holidays, my mom was working, right? And Christmas time, New Year's, she would work for the airlines. And so we spent time with my friends' families, right? And they even got us gifts. And at that time, I didn't think about this. I actually, one of my friends, John, on my 20th high school unit, I actually got a chance to go back to Long Island, and I visited with his parents, who were, say, I'm going to get emotional, very open to, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But they were always open to welcoming, my brother and I, and just being a part of our lives, right? And I'm not saying that my mom or my dad didn't want to be there for us, but it was a big deal. So John's parents, Craig's parents, they know who they are, and so that was big. And then in college, to be honest with you, like these little steps, my racquetball coach was a big influence to me, right? Really taught me the game, to enjoy it, and was there. So I was always seeking to talk about fathers, right? And talking about this male leadership in the home, and why I feel that's so important is that my father wasn't absent, but we weren't close. And because, and since they divorced, it was a really big rift. And also then he remarried, right? So I think I was always seeking that. And then honestly, when I met my wife, I mean, she's been a huge influence on me. I mean, and in her family, right? My late father-in-law, just so, I mean, those are like just being loved and accepting. So those are, and I'll say this isn't sound cliche, and then really just seeking, really looking to the Word and following Jesus. I mean, it's huge for me. So anyway, I apologize. I always get teary eyed, and then my brother too. My brother's big influence on me. So yeah, I'll stop there. I'm gonna lose it if I say any more.
Thanks so much for sharing, Alex. And tears are good sometimes, because actually it's it shows that the love and the gratitude for who we have, and those that we've been lucky to have around us. And Jay, I bet that they have been just feeling just as fortunate to have had you in their lives as well.
I hope
100%.
so.
Yeah, you've got a great sense of humor, very, very warm character. I mean, I reached out straight off the back off LinkedIn, so I was like, wow, hey, how cool. I'll share my post. And, that's one of the things I love about the world, is that, this digital world, whilst, yes, okay, there's lots of bad things and, lots of, mean tweets or whatever, but there are so many wonderful things that come out of technology.
Yeah.
When you think that we can connect across the pond as far as we are at, and be able to speak and connect on an emotive level with people.
Absolutely.
How joyous is that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Great.
Wonderful. So thank you for sharing. And I think, by the same token of your gratitude, others feel it for you, clearly fantastic role model. And, I just love that you've been sharing, so openly and honestly and, authentically, not to overuse that word too much, with everyone, how you feel. I think it's so important to see emotion coming, especially from men. And I don't mean that it just should be from men. I think, important to see from men and women, and those that would identify neither male or female. But I think, particularly it can be sometimes difficult for men, actually to, certainly I think it's hard for my husband sometimes to show his emotion. I always say to him, open up to me, show me some emotion, please. But I think it's absolutely critically important, And it's funny, because I had my counsellor on a podcast recently, and she said we've seen a rise in men. Back in the day when she started, there was not many men who would be willing to share their feelings and to speak. And I think that's one of the joyous things that we see. The best leaders and are ones who are willing to be vulnerable, and who are willing to show their feelings, because that makes us human. None of us, we are humans. We are human beings with living,
Absolutely.
breathing, beating hearts and souls and everything like that. And so, why would we pretend to be machines when we're not? Anyhow, you've heard enough from me. I will shut up now, because I've been talking too much. This is meant to be a lightning round, and I've completely destroyed it. So last of all, I will ask, if you could go back in time, Alex, give your younger self advice, the young Alex, a number of years ago, whether it be when you're mowing those lawns and, look, you've come such a long way, which is just phenomenal. Would you give yourself any advice, or what would you say to yourself? Or it could be someone who's in a similar situation as you were, who is embarking on their career journey and doesn't know what they're going to do right now. What would you say?
Yeah, I think the hardest part, if I were to talk to my younger self, is life is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? So always have the long view and have a plan, right? I was sort of waffling my way a little bit even earlier in my career. My wife and I talk about this a lot. It's like, yeah, I wish I had a plan. I wish I sought out more mentorship. I wish I did this, or I wish I did that, right? But bottom line is that the one thing that did keep me grounded was, hey, at some point it clicked. This is the long game, right? Life is a journey. There's never really I feel like there's really never a destination until we're 6 feet under, and whatever happens after that, hopefully. But yeah, have a plan, and then I would tell my younger self, please do not eat as much as you can, because your metabolism will change, and it did for me at 30. Like, so be very clear. Yeah, work out, do all that, but stop eating all the pasta and all the dessert, because you're thinking, hey, I'm going to be skinny for the rest of my life. So anyway, I'll end it with that. But yeah, have a plan, and it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Very good tips there. Alex, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a joy.
Same here, Leila. Thank you so much for having me. It's great connecting with you.
As always, I do a little summary at the end, but you know what? There's so many takeaways. I mean, first of all, for everyone who's listening in, I know that you'll have really enjoyed this podcast, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I did. You know, some of the key pieces of learning for me, certainly, and I hope for all of you as well. And don't worry, that will all be in the show notes at the end of the show today, are the absolute importance of really scratching below the surface. You know, there's so many different things, intersectionalities that make us up as human beings. And you know, we've been lucky enough today to hear from Alex, who's kindly shared with us his story. You know, but there's so many different things that make us up as people. You know, don't be scared to have those questions and to ask those dumb questions, inverted commas. They aren't dumb. They are questions that come from a good place. If you're curious and you're interested, just ask. It's often the gateway to a new relationship and opening the door to feeling far more comfortable, not only in learning about others, but learning about yourself as well, because it is by learning about others, and it is by finding out, you know, about what it is that make people tick, and what their idiosyncrasies are, and what those little details are, and those emotions and those feelings that we might not have known existed just by face value from the biases that we do all hold. You know, but to really dig deep and to ask those questions, because this should not, religion in particular, and all other facets of diversity and inclusion, should not be taboo subjects. It doesn't mean that we can't be friends, as Alex so lovely, you know, very lovelily put it. You know, can still all be friends afterwards. And actually, why are there so many barriers in between all of us? You know, there is a time, never has there been a more important time than there is right now, with, you know, many unfortunate negativities going on in the world, that we can all harness the power of humanity. There's things that are bigger than us out there, and you know, look, none of us are perfect, but you know, as you say there in your kind of closing piece, is life is a journey. Do we ever reach self-actualization at the top of Maslow's hierarchy? Who knows? Question mark. But you know what, we can damn well try to be the best people that we can be, and to inspire and educate and motivate as many possible people as we can. So Alex, thank you so much again. You know, just you know, joy to meet a kindred spirit and soul. And I love how philosophical this podcast has been. Actually, it's you know, it's been one of our real kind of deep, meaningful podcasts. And you know, really appreciate you sharing your story and sharing your thoughts. And so yes, let's get more of this. Let's get more emotions out there. Let's get more emotion in the boardroom. I think it is key to future success of business ultimately, and businesses that really mean what they say. So thank you as ever. My name is Leila Mackenzie Dellis, and you're listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show. We've been joined today by the fantastic Alex Yu at Microsoft. You can check out all of the show notes at the end of today's show, so don't worry if you've missed out on some of the great book recommendations and some of the key pieces of learning. All of the key pieces will be in our show notes at the end of today's show. So visit www.darglobal.org/podcast, and you can download for free on your favorite app or podcast tool that you use, or you can watch the video version as well live on our website. Thanks so much, and see you again next week. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.